Now, I'm under false pretenses, I think, because I'm today I'm going to represent Headrest, which I'll tell you about in a minute. I'm a former secondary head teacher in the Isle of Dogs, 17 years as a head, because I believe it takes a long time to turn those schools around. And if I ever did, I don't know. I worked hard at it and I loved it. When I retired as a head teacher, somebody persuaded me, Professor Viv Ellis, if you know him, persuaded me to go and do a PhD, which I have to tell you is harder than running a school, a secondary school. But I managed to get through, and I'm now Dr. Kenny Frederick, so I'm very proud of that. I never managed to get a Danewood, but being a doctor is better because I've earned that one. As part of my PhD, my PhD was around teacher rounds, and all the conversations we're having today, I learned so much from that, because what it did was put me back working with teachers in the classroom and working with them so that they could learn from each other, from peer observation and learning each other. And you can read about it in this book, which Headrest actually produced. I'm in chapter 16. But it's about teacher rounds. And what I learned was that, well, if you take the judgment away and you put teachers together, they will talk about teaching. They will improve each other's practice by going in and seeing each other and learning. And that is, to me, if I was going back to be a head teacher now, and I have written lots of recommendations, and I talk to head teachers all the time, said stop monitoring, because what the teachers told me that they were being constantly scrutinized, constantly monitored. And that is very exhausting, and it's not helpful, and they doubt themselves all the time. But actually, when they're talking to each other, learning from each other, that's what collegiality that we were talking about. That first slide you put up there, Carl, to me was very important. So, that's the answer as far as I'm concerned, but that's beside the point. The other hat I wear sometimes, I work for the inclusion quality markers. Inclusion is my passion. And inclusion isn't just about the kids. Of course, it's the kids, but actually, if you don't include the staff, you can't include the kids. And actually, it's about everything that's happening, all the stuff that Gus was talking about in terms of social cohesion. Or do you remember community cohesion was part of the Ofsted framework? Which is really important, and I think it should be brought back. But all of those sorts of things coming together. So, and I visit a lot of schools. I work with a lot of schools, but nationally and internationally, and see a lot of what's going in and talk a lot of head teachers. So Headrest is something that I volunteer with. It was set up in 2020. There were 4 of us. Let's see if I can move this around. There were, it's a confidential, sort of a Samaritans for head teachers. And we set it up. We set up Roz and Andrew, who's edited this book. It set up when we noticed that on Twitter or X, or whatever we call it now, there were a lot of head teachers were in trouble and were feeling really isolated. And we thought they need somebody to talk to. So we set up this telephone number, really, and website and so on. So we don't get any funding or anything. There is somebody who pays for the website, I think, and that's about it. And we just do it. There's 4 of us, but there's also, we have Julie, who's a HMI, who helps us particularly with Ofsted, which has become increasingly the big issue. And sometimes other head teachers come and help when things get a bit tough. So it's confidential. People don't have to say where. I mean, they usually do tell us, which they come from all over the country. That somebody's recommended that they ring us. They know when to talk to, and that they ring us, because in the same way as when I was doing teacher rounds, people are frightened to put their hands up and say, I'm struggling. I have to say, it wasn't a problem I had when I was a head. I would put my hand up any old time. And that's what saved me and kept me going for 17 years, because I would ask for help if I needed it. And there are lots of people who did that one. So we've been going since 2020. We do an annual report, which I've sent to Carl, and he can send it to you if you want to look at our annual report. It'll give you more detail about what we do. We thought that after after COVID was over, that the calls, we wouldn't be needed anymore. We thought we'd just sort of stop doing it. But of course, there were other issues and it's continued. This year, we've already started a really, really busy year. So the key concerns were school budgets, obviously. I was lucky I was ahead in a time when we were really well funded. You know, we had Every Child Matters, we had good money. I was working for Tower Hamlets when poverty was a big issue. And I've been saying for 30 years that I've been told for 30 years that poverty isn't an issue and it can't be used as an excuse. Well, it can, and it is, and it was still there. So, and of course, now schools are having to do the job that I was doing years ago, but without the money. Difficulties retaining and recruiting staff, cost of living crisis, so, you know, even worse for families, difficulties at the whole mental health issues and getting support is really a big issue, and lots of the lack of external services for children and families. So schools are having to deal with all of that. They're the last people standing. So families, communities, everybody's come to them. The whole bit about social services, support for young people and families that aren't there, the parental pressures. I'll talk about parents in a minute, and the unreasonable demands often of parents now who want things done and they want it now, and they're making unreasonable demands in school. It was wearing down head teachers. SLT taken on the workload often of teaching assistants, because the teaching assistants have been first to go when budgets are cut, yet the children still need the support, and it's often SLT or whoever's there is dealing with that. So the main stresses, 5 core sources of stress during this period were Ofsted, and still increased, that's continued. Increased instances of poor support from some who oversee schools locally. Now, what we often found is that we're talking to head teachers, often particularly small schools are really suffering. So the small infant schools, particularly the small rural schools, where the head teacher is often the only person. They don't have a deputy, they don't have a senior leadership team. Some, they don't have a caretaker, and they're asked them to do everything. So when it comes then to, you know, Ofsted and leading subjects, they're leading them all. They're the DSL, they're the Senko, they're everything. And it's an impossible situation. And what we're coming across is a lot of people who've been put in that position, often because they're the last person standing. So they've been told, well, you know, you're the year 6 teacher. You've been there for a long time. You know the school. We've had to move this other head teacher on, or nobody's applied for the job. You take it on. We'll support you. It'll be fine. They are convinced and quite flattered, really, because it's nice to be asked to be the head teacher. They take it on, Ofsted come in, do a number on them, and they're out the door, their whole career finished. And that is happening not just in small schools, but all over the place, where people have been put in positions where they didn't want to be in, promised support, and they're not getting it. And then when things go wrong, they're suddenly on gardening leave, but more than that, they're sacked, and their career is ruined, as well as their whole mental health and so on. And it's been that's the big issue. Ruth Perry's untimely death obviously increased during that time, and we know already because we've been speaking to people who had mental breakdowns after they've had Ofsted feedback, head teachers. We've had to ask, you know, when we're talking to people, can we speak to your wife? Because we've had to say, look, you need to get, you know, your husband to the doctors in the morning. You know, this is serious now, because you know, we've felt sometimes that we need supervision. It's like being in a safeguarding position. You're talking to people confidentially. I've rung Samaritans to ask for their advice, and actually what do we do to keep ourselves safe and to keep everybody else safe in that sort of situation. So it's that serious, and we're just volunteers doing the best that we can. So the poor support from the LAs and MATs and governance, obviously. So somebody says, well, this school is failing, they're in deep trouble, what we're going to do? And the answer seems to be to get the head teacher out. So we talk to head teachers who've just suddenly been sent home. They're not able to access their emails. They're not allowed to talk to anybody. They don't know what it is they've done wrong, other than the school has been judged to be unsatisfactory. And, that's a really big issue. And then you and more experienced leaders feeling a sense of imposter syndrome. Now, any of you ever been a head in here? No, you have that anyway, don't you? Suddenly you got the job as a head and you're thinking, bloody hell, what am I going to do now? I don't know how to do it anyone else. And I always say to people, get a team around you. I don't care who's in that team. It doesn't have to be a senior leader. In my case, there was often a TA, a community person, the cleaner, people who come and talk to me, and I talk to anyone. And you get a group around you, don't try to do it on their own. So, people doubting themselves, being in the Ofsted window, waiting, when are they going to come? When is the call going to come? Are we ready? Because I know, because I've been in that position, what's going to happen if we don't do well. The inconsistency of inspectors, because you don't know who's going to come through the door. Now, inclusion is my thing, and I know sometimes an inspector who understands what inclusion means, and the ones who don't. They pretend they do. They may have done half-day course on it, but they don't actually include it. And it's wider than SEN. It's the whole gambit. It's everything that goes on in that school. And it depends who comes through the door. If you've got one who comes through and understands what the school's about, that's a better, but a lot aren't. The unsuitability of the one framework fits all approach, as was mentioned earlier, which it doesn't, because you've got the same framework for this tiny rural school with 40 children, and you've got the same for a large secondary school like mine, and it just doesn't work. The two require improvement. Cliff edge, if you get two, then suddenly you're going to be academized whether you wanted to or not. And the inability to share Ofsted outcomes with anybody else. So you're the head teacher, you're told you're in there, you're told your school requires improvement or whatever the term is, or in special measures, and you're not supposed to talk about anyone. I never listened to that one anyway, because I told everybody. But, that's a horrible thing to bear. And I know, because I've been there, what I was told my school was needed improvement, whatever I can't remember the term was at the time. And I remember sitting in that office and thinking, what do I do now? Where do we go from here? And it was a horrible, horrible feeling to be so alone. But for me, I did share and, I did get support. And the difference between the inspection feedback and the content. So people sometimes, as somebody said earlier, they're told one thing by the inspector that this is all going really well. And then when it comes to the final judgment, it's been completely different. And that has been awful. Inspector rudeness to staff, hand in your face, I don't want to hear, not actually want to hear from the school. And the community response to an adverse report. And a lot of the heads we speak to live in their community, particularly in the rural schools, particularly small primary schools. Now, if you live in that community, you've been sent home on gardening leave, or whatever they call it nowadays, you can't even go to the shops because everybody's talking. Nobody knows, what's happened to you. Horrible. And peer support from those who oversee schools locally has been really poor. Now, I was lucky. My director of education, Kevin Collins, God bless him. I don't believe in God, but you know what I mean. He was so good, and actually, because I would have resigned, and he said, "No, you're not." And had governors who went the same. So I was supported, but lots aren't. Because governors, inexperienced groups very often who haven't got the confidence in what they're supposed to do. And if the local authority or the MAT, whoever it is, says this person's got to go, it's their fault, that's what they do. And, that's been really difficult for head teachers. Parental complaints are really on the up. Since Ofsted, that has become a huge issue where parents are, and I speak as a governor now, because I'm a governor in 2 schools, where constant complaint, and even when you answer the complaint and you follow the procedure exactly, don't want to hear it unless it's the answer that they want. And I don't think people realise the anxiety that causes the heads. So if that's then backed up, where I'm one governor, we had a huge issue with that. And lucky enough, I collated all the complaints that were coming from 6 people who had it was a racist issue, to be honest, because the head teacher was a Muslim head teacher. And they obviously didn't like it. Now, down at the Isle of Dogs, they'd have said that to your face in no uncertain terms. You knew where you were. In this other school, which was is a sort of a leafy sort of part of London, it was far more subtle and underhand, but it was definitely racist. Been to the local authority, said, look, this is what's happening. We want to do, the malicious complaint policy. Ofsted arrived in the week after, but thankfully, they weren't interested. We'd showed them what we'd done and didn't take any notice of that, but that's not always the case. So I always say to schools to follow that through. Sometimes some of the heads were talking about they haven't got supportive staff. Sometimes the head, because they're different from the one before and that people don't want to change. And that's been a real difficulty. And again, problem with governors, often unsupportive or don't really understand the issues and can't really help. So the head has got nowhere to go for. So the proposed new inspection framework due to be in place in November is causing great anxiety. We've had the school leaders feel powerless, and I think that's the feeling that there is. We can't do anything about it, so we'll just have to get on with it. NAHT, I've noticed now, have asked heads to go to their governors or whoever employs them and actually get them to do a risk assessment before there's an Ofsted inspection. And I think that's a very good idea. So, we'll see what happens with that. And I'm glad to see that the unions now are really working together on this. I've been doing lots of work with the NUT on their response as well. So we need to, I think the unions really got to come together. And I think we're going to have to be saying no sometimes and saying you're not coming in. So Headrest, we believe that the trust in Ofsted is irreversible, that it's actually gone so far now. And the fact this whole big listen was a farce. We were positive about the new government. We were positive about the new chief inspector. We're not quite so positive about that now. The big listen, as I say, was a farce. Our annual report stated there remains to be needed for a pause in graded inspections, etc., but none of that has happened. And a recognition that's now time to adopt a school accountability model that places greater emphasis on support and development, as we've said before. Dame Christine Gilbert, to her review, which we contributed, we recommend that be adopted. And obviously the Lord Jim Knight, a lot of the work that he'd done on that was really useful. So what we're just saying is really that's an overview from head teachers across the spectrum who have been on the receiving end of this. The latest report I saw yesterday, I think I can't remember the percentage of head teachers and teachers who leave their post within the first year of being in post. And that's unsustainable. Another lot then, and even more than after 5 years. Now, people putting people out on gardening leave and actually saying off you go is not the answer. We always recommend that heads get a coach, an external coach that's not part of the local authority or the trust, someone that they can sound things out, because usually they know the answers and we're talking to them. They're telling us is it do it. That's what you need to do. And it's just a listening ear, but actually just putting people out where they're going to come from and how many can you get through. We're not disposable. Neither our teachers are disposable. And I say and I work with a lot of teachers and I work with a lot of head teachers. And I always say to them, the job is too big to do alone. You need to be part of a group. You need to work together. The work I do with the Inclusion Quality Mark brings people together to share good practice, not to keep reinventing the wheel, to talk things through. And that works. That developmental approach works. Hitting people over the head constantly and telling them how rubbish they are is not good for anybody.
No, for children when they're
exactly. So that really is where we're at. So any of you want to ring us for a chat. You'll find us on there's a website, Headrest UK, and we do our best to help with what we have.